I, 58, am a widower. My life, since my wife Martha passed, has been a quiet affair, defined mostly by the business I built from the ground up and my son, Leo, 28, My world was orderly, predictable, and, I thought, secure. That sense of security shattered on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. It began with an email from my financial advisor, a man named Gene, whose communications were usually as predictable as the sunrise. This one was different. The subject line was simply, "Urgent query." I opened it, a small knot of unease tightening in my stomach. The email was brief. It noted a significant outgoing wire transfer from my primary investment account. The amount was $1 million. The recipient was an entity I had never heard of, the Children's Future Fund. The transaction was flagged for its size and unusual nature, but since it had been initiated using all the correct security protocols, which were linked to a device I knew belonged to my son, the bank had processed it. Gene was asking if I had authorized this transfer. I stared at the screen for a long time. $1 million. It was a staggering sum, but the money itself was not the first thing that struck me. It was the name of the charity, a generic, hollow-sounding title that set off every alarm bell in my head. And then there was the method. Leo had access to my accounts, a legacy of trust one had established years ago, believing he should understand the workings of the family finances he would one day inherit. He had a special tablet configured by my security team that could authorize such things. I had given it to him for emergencies. This did not feel like an emergency. It felt like a betrayal. My first call was to Gene. His voice was tight with professional concern. "I hoped it was a mistake, a typo on our end," he said. "But the authorization is legitimate. It came from the designated device, passed all voice and password verifications. The transfer was completed yesterday morning." "I did not authorize it, Gene," I said, my own voice calm, almost detached. It was a tone I used in difficult negotiations, a shield against the turmoil I felt inside. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Then we need to act quickly," Gene said. "I can start the process of trying to claw it back, but with wire transfers, especially to a charity, it can be nearly impossible unless we can prove fraud." "Prove fraud." I repeated the words. They tasted like ash in my mouth. "Thank you, Gene. Start the process. Keep me informed." I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of my study. The room was lined with books I had read and photos of a life I had built. There was Martha, smiling on a beach in Italy. There was Leo as a boy, sitting on my shoulders at a baseball game. My family, the very foundation of my world. And now, a crack had appeared right down the middle of it. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that Leo was not alone in this. My son was a good man, but he was also impressionable, especially when it came to my brother, Robert, and his wife, Clara. They had always been the fun aunt and uncle, the ones who told Leo he needed to live a little, to not be so serious like his old man. Since Martha's death, their influence had grown. They filled a void I had left, a void created by my own grief and my focus on work. They were charismatic, full of grand ideas about social justice and philanthropy, ideas that always seemed to be funded by someone else's money. They were also deeply, resentfully jealous of my success. It was a poison that had seeped into our family dynamic for decades. They lived in a constant state of financial precariousness, always chasing a lifestyle they couldn't afford, while I lived simply, investing my money, growing my business. They saw my prudence as a personal insult, my success as a stroke of luck they had been denied. Their backhanded comments at family gatherings were a familiar sting. "Must be nice not to worry about bills," Clara would say with a brittle smile. "Some people are just blessed," Robert would add, a world of meaning packed into that single word. I picked up the phone to call Leo. My hand was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. He answered on the third ring, his voice casual, almost breezy. "Hey Dad, what's up?" "Leo, I need to talk to you about something important," I began. "I received an alert from Gene this morning." "Oh." The casualness in his voice sharpened into something else. "Caution." It's about a $1 million transfer from my account, I said, keeping my tone even, to a charity called the Children's Future Fund. The silence on his end was profound. I could hear his breath, a faint, shaky sound. I waited. I did not fill the silence. I let it stretch, letting the weight of my words sink in. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was defensive, almost rehearsed. I did that, he said. It was for you. For your legacy. My legacy? I asked, the words feeling foreign and absurd. What are you talking about, Leo? You're always so focused on the business, on making money, he said, the words coming in a rush now. Aunt Clara and Uncle Robert were saying how important it is to give back, to do something meaningful. They found this amazing charity. They help underprivileged kids get a real start in life. I thought it would be a good thing to do in your name, to show that our family cares about more than just profits. The mention of Robert and Clara was the confirmation I needed, the final piece clicking into place. They were the architects of this. My son was just their tool. The pain of that realization was sharp and deep, far worse than the loss of the money. They had turned my own son against me, using his good intentions as a weapon. Leo, I said slowly, carefully, did you look into this charity yourself? Did you see any of their financial reports? Any proof of the work they do? Of course, he said a little too quickly. Uncle Robert vetted them completely. He said they're a new organization, very lean, so all the money goes directly to the kids, not to administrative costs like those other big charities. It was a textbook answer, the kind of thing someone says when they are repeating a script. My brother's words coming out of my son's mouth. A new, lean organization. It was the perfect cover for a scam. I see, I said, the cold resolve hardening within me. We will talk about this more later, Leo. I'm coming into the city for Thanksgiving in a few weeks. We'll all be together. We can discuss it then. Okay, Dad, he said, sounding relieved that the confrontation was over. You'll see. It was a good thing. You'll be proud. I hung up the phone. Proud. The word echoed in the quiet room. I was not proud. I was devastated. But beneath the devastation, a different feeling was beginning to stir. It was a cold, quiet anger. The kind that doesn't lash out but waits. The kind that plans. Robert and Clara had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had used my son to steal from me, and they had done it under the guise of morality and family. They thought I was just an old man, lost in his work, easily fooled. They were about to find out how wrong they were. Thanksgiving was coming, and I would be bringing a guest they did not expect. The truth. The first step was to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The name, the Children's Future Fund, was so blandly benevolent it was suspicious in itself. I sat down at my computer and began to search. The charity had a website, and it was surprisingly polished. It was filled with stock photos of smiling children from diverse backgrounds, their faces beaming with hope. There were vague mission statements about empowering the next generation and building brighter futures. There were testimonials, but the names were generic, like Maria S. and John P., with no locations or specific stories attached. I clicked on the About Us page. It listed a board of directors, but the names were unfamiliar. I searched for each one. Dr. Alistair Finch, a supposed child psychologist. No record of him at any major university or professional organization. Ms. Eleanor Vance, a purported financial expert with a background in nonprofits. Her name yielded nothing but a few social media profiles of different women across the country, none of whom matched the generic headshot on the charity's website. It was a gallery of ghosts. The contact page listed a mailing address, which a quick search revealed to be a private mail services store in a strip mall in Delaware. A.P.O. Box. There was a phone number, so I called it. It went straight to a recorded message, a warm female voice that said, "Thank you for calling the Children's Future Fund. Your call is important to us. Please leave a message, and one of our dedicated team members will get back to you." It was the kind of anonymous, corporate greeting that could belong to anyone, anywhere. I spent 2 hours digging, and every path I took led to a dead end. There were no public filings, no Form 990s available on any charity watchdog site. For a non-profit organization that had apparently received $1 million donation, they were utterly invisible. A brand new website, a P.O. box, and a cast of fictional characters. It was a flimsy facade, but it had been enough to fool my son. Or rather, it had been enough for Robert and Clara to present as legitimate to a son who wanted to believe them. The pain returned, sharp and insistent. How could Leo have been so naive? But I knew the answer. He wasn't naive. He was searching. Searching for a purpose, for a way to define himself outside of my shadow. Robert and Clara had offered him a shortcut. They had told him he could be a philanthropist, a man of substance, all with a single, grand gesture. And he had believed them because he was hungry for it. They had exploited his insecurity, his desire to impress me, to prove he was more than just the rich kid. They knew exactly which strings to pull. My anger began to solidify into a plan. I could have called Leo back immediately, confronted him with the evidence, demanded he face what he had done. But that would only make him defensive. He would run to Robert and Clara, and they would circle the wagons, coaching him on what to say, painting me as the heartless father who cared more about money than children. No, a direct assault was not the answer. This required strategy. This required a stage. I made 2 more calls. The first was to my lawyer, Arthur. He was a man I had known for 30 years, a sharp, methodical mind I trusted completely. I laid out the situation in precise detail, the transfer, the fake charity, Leo's involvement, and my suspicions about my brother. Arthur listened without interruption. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. Then he said, "This is ugly, Mark. Are you sure you want to proceed down a path that could lead to criminal charges for your own family?" "They used my son to commit a felony, Arthur," I replied, my voice hard. "They're not my family. Not anymore. What are my options? Legally? We report it as fraud. The bank will launch an investigation. We can file a civil suit to recover the funds. And we can and should report this to the authorities. Wire fraud is a federal crime. Given the amount, the FBI would likely be interested. But there's another agency you should think about." "Which one?" I asked. "The IRS," Arthur said. "Charitable fraud is their territory. An organization soliciting donations, especially one of this size, without being a registered 501c3, is breaking a dozen tax laws. A report from you, as the supposed donor, would trigger an immediate and very serious investigation. It would be thorough." I liked the sound of that. Thorough. It was a word that promised consequences. "And what about Leo?" I asked, the question heavy with a father's dread. "His involvement complicates things," Arthur admitted. "He authorized the transfer. He could be seen as an accomplice. However, if we frame it as him being a victim of manipulation, a pawn in their scheme, we can likely protect him from the worst of it. We need to show he had no knowledge of the fraud and received no financial benefit." "Can you be sure of that?" "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "Leo wouldn't have taken a dime. That's not who he is. He did this because he thought it was the right thing to do. He was a fool, but he was an honest fool." "Good," Arthur said. "That will be our position." He was deceived. The first step is to gather irrefutable proof linking Robert and Clara directly to this sham charity. We need more than just Leo's word that they suggested it. We need a direct connection. That led to my second call. It was to a man named Frank, a private investigator I had used in the past for corporate due diligence. Frank was a former detective, a quiet, unassuming man who was incredibly good at finding things people wanted to keep hidden. He was discreet, efficient, and completely devoid of sentimentality. I met Frank for coffee the next morning. I gave him the name of the charity, the website, the P.O. box, and the names of my brother and his wife. "I want to know who is behind this," I told him. "Who registered the website? Who set up the bank account? I want a direct, undeniable link between this fund and Robert and Clara." Frank listened, taking notes in a small, worn notebook. He didn't ask about the family dynamics. He didn't offer sympathy. He just focused on the facts. The website registration will be shielded, most likely, he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum. But there are ways around that. The bank account will be tougher. But they always leave a trail. Everyone makes mistakes. How long? I asked. Give me a week, he said. Maybe 2. I'll be in touch as soon as I have something concrete. As I left the coffee shop, I felt a sense of grim purpose settle over me. The trap was being set. The pieces were moving into place. I had 3 weeks until Thanksgiving. 3 weeks to gather my evidence, to prepare my case. The holiday had always been a time for family, for gratitude. This year it would be a day of reckoning. I would host the dinner at my city apartment, as I always did. Robert and Clara would arrive, full of false smiles and sanctimonious pronouncements about their latest charitable endeavors. Leo would be there, caught in the middle, still believing in the lie they had sold him. And I would sit at the head of the table, a loving patriarch on the surface, but underneath, I would be a judge waiting to deliver a verdict. They wanted to talk about my legacy. I decided then and there that my legacy would be teaching them a lesson they would never forget, that you do not betray the people who trust you. Not in my family. Not on my watch. The week that followed was a strange kind of purgatory. I went about my days, managing my business, speaking to my staff, but my mind was elsewhere. It was with Frank, imagining him sifting through digital records. It was with Arthur, picturing him preparing legal frameworks. And most of all, it was with Leo. He called a few times, his tone artificially bright, as if nothing had happened. He talked about his work, a friend's upcoming wedding, trivial things. He never mentioned the donation again, and neither did I. It was $1 million ghost hovering between us, an unspoken testament to the chasm that had opened up. During one call, he mentioned his aunt and uncle. Aunt Clara is so excited for Thanksgiving, he said. She's been talking about your famous roast turkey for weeks. I'm sure she is, I said, my voice carefully neutral. They're doing so well, Dad, he continued, oblivious to the ice in my tone. Their consulting business is really taking off, and they're so involved in the community. They really inspire me. It took every ounce of my self-control not to snap, not to tell him his inspiring role models were common thieves who had used him as a pickpocket. Instead, I just said, "That's nice, Leo." I felt a pang of guilt for my deception, for the public humiliation I was planning for him. But it was a necessary cruelty. He needed to see them for what they were, not through the rose-tinted filter they had so carefully constructed for him. He needed to be shocked out of their orbit, and a quiet conversation was not going to accomplish that. He needed to witness their downfall firsthand. Frank's first report came 5 days after our meeting. It arrived as a password-protected file in my email. The subject was Initial Findings. I opened it with a sense of nervous anticipation. Frank had confirmed my initial suspicions. The charity was a ghost. It had been incorporated in Delaware 3 months prior, a state notorious for its lax corporate disclosure laws. The incorporation documents were filed by a registered agent service, providing a layer of anonymity. The names of the board members were, as I suspected, untraceable. But Frank had found the first thread. The website, Children's Future Fund.org, had been registered through a Privacy Shield service in Iceland. However, the payment for the domain name and the first year of web hosting had not been made with a credit card. It had been made via a direct transfer from a small, regional bank in Pennsylvania. The account belonged to a newly formed LLC. The name of the LLC was Clara Consulting, my sister-in-law's name. It was the business Leo had just mentioned, the business that was taking off. I leaned back in my chair, a bitter smile touching my lips. It was sloppy. They had been so focused on the grand deception of the charity itself that they had made a rookie mistake on the infrastructure. They had used their own fledgling business, a business they were likely bragging about to the family, to pay for the creation of their fraudulent website. It was a direct link. It was the first nail in their coffin. The next day, I had a thought. I remembered my cousin, Sarah. She was a good woman, but she loved to gossip. She stayed in touch with everyone in the family, including Clara. I decided to call her, under the pretense of coordinating Thanksgiving plans. We chatted for a few minutes about who was bringing what dish before I casually steered the conversation. Speaking of Clara, I said, Leo mentioned she and Robert are doing very well with their new business. Oh, you have no idea, Sarah said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. They're flying high. Clara called me last week, just bubbling. She said they landed a huge new client, a big philanthropist who wants to stay anonymous. She said it's a game changer for them. An anonymous philanthropist. The irony was so thick I could taste it. That's wonderful for them, I said, my voice smooth as silk. They've worked hard. Well, they're certainly spending like it, Sarah went on, happily providing the information I was fishing for. Robert just got a new car. A Mercedes. He posted a picture of it online. Said it was a reward for a project well done. And Clara's been talking about a trip to Europe for the spring. It must be nice. I mean, it was just a few months ago they were asking me if I knew anyone who could give them a short-term loan. I thanked Sarah for the information and ended the call. A new Mercedes. A planned trip to Europe. It was happening even faster than I had imagined. They weren't even trying to be subtle. The $1 million was burning a hole in their pocket, and their greed was overriding their caution. They felt invincible. They believed they had committed the perfect crime. A few days later, Frank called me directly. I have something you need to see, he said. His voice was different. It had a hard edge to it. It's about the bank account. We met at his office, a small, nondescript space in a boring suburban office park. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He pushed a folder across the desk towards me. The charity's bank account was opened at the same regional bank in Pennsylvania as the LLC, he explained. The signatory on the account is listed as Alistair Finch, the phantom psychologist from the website. But to open a corporate account, you need identification. The bank manager was new, a bit green. He accepted a driver's license as ID. Frank tapped a page in the folder. It was a grainy photocopy of a driver's license. The name was Alistair Finch. The picture, however, was unmistakably my brother, Robert. He was wearing a cheap pair of glasses and had combed his hair differently, but it was him. There was no doubt. He used his own face. I murmured, a wave of disbelief washing over me. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. People get cocky, Frank said. He probably thought no one would ever look this closely. He figured the name was enough. He didn't count on the donor being the one to hire an investigator. But there was more. The folder also contained the bank statements for the Children's Future Fund. I saw the incoming wire transfer of $1 million from my account. And then I saw the outgoing transfers. They started the very next day. $50,000 to a credit card company, likely paying off a massive debt. $200,000 transferred directly to the Clara Consulting LLC account, labeled as a consulting fee, $85,000 wired to a Mercedes-Benz dealership. And then the largest transfer of all, $500,000 wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. In less than 2 weeks, they had already laundered or spent over 80% of the money. The lean organization where all the money went to the kids was a personal slush fund. They hadn't even bothered to let the money sit. They were like vultures, tearing at the carcass without a shred of patience or foresight. I closed the folder. The evidence was overwhelming, damning, and beautifully complete. I had everything I needed. Robert's face on a fake ID. Clara's company as the financial vehicle. The direct paper trail from my account to their luxury car. This is more than enough, Frank, I said, my voice quiet. Thank you. There's one more thing, he said, pulling a single sheet of paper from his own file. My contact at the bank felt bad about being duped. He remembered something. The day Robert came in to open the account, he wasn't alone. A woman was with him. She waited in the car, but the manager saw her. He recognized her from a local charity luncheon a few months back. Her name was Clara. It was perfect. They were in it together, every step of the way. I took the folder of evidence, paid Frank his fee, and walked out into the cold November air. The wind was sharp, but I felt a strange sense of calm. The mystery was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I knew what they had done. I knew how they had done it. And I knew exactly what I was going to do about it. My Thanksgiving dinner was no longer just a plan. It was a promise. A promise of justice, served cold, right alongside the turkey and cranberry sauce. The next step was to formalize the consequences. I scheduled a meeting with Arthur and laid out the contents of Frank's folder on his polished mahogany conference table. The fake driver's license with Robert's face. The bank statements showing the money trail to Clara's company and the car dealership. The incorporation papers. Arthur picked up the photocopy of the license, holding it delicately between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a piece of contaminated material. He looked at Robert's picture, then at me. A slow, grim smile spread across his face. In my 30 years as a lawyer, he said, I have rarely seen a case of fraud so breathtakingly stupid. This is not just a smoking gun, Mark. This is a signed, notarized confession. So, what's the plan? I asked. The plan is multi-pronged, he said, leaning back in his chair, all business now. First, we go to the U.S. Attorney's Office with this entire package. We present you as the victim and your son as the unwitting pawn. With this evidence, they will open a criminal investigation immediately. Indictments for wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy will be on the table. He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. Second, we contact the IRS. I will personally call the Criminal Investigation Division. We will report the fraudulent charity and provide them with the same evidence. Tax evasion on this scale is something they take very seriously. They will be audited into oblivion. Their personal and business accounts will be frozen. Liens will be placed on their assets. The new Mercedes will be the first thing to go. And the civil suit? I asked. That will be the easiest part, Arthur said with a wave of his hand. We'll get a judgment for the full $1 million, plus damages. Recovering it might be tricky, since they've already sent half of it offshore, but we'll get a good portion of it back from their assets here. We will bankrupt them, Mark. Professionally and personally. The scope of it was immense, a legal tidal wave poised to crash down on their lives. For a fleeting moment, I felt a sliver of something that might have been pity. They were my brother and his wife. We had shared holidays, celebrated birthdays, mourned at funerals. But the moment passed, burned away by the memory of them using my son, of their smug smiles and whispered insults. They had made their choice. Now they would live with it. There is one more thing I need, Arthur, I said. What's that? I need you to help me draft a letter. To the IRS. From me. I want to officially report the donation and request an audit of the Children's Future Fund, and of myself as the donor, to ensure everything is above board. I want an official notification letter from them, addressed to me. Arthur raised an eyebrow. You want to invite an audit upon yourself? Mark, that's generally not advisable. I have nothing to hide, I said. My books are clean, but I want that letter. I want a piece of paper from the United States government with my name and the name of their fake charity on it. I have a specific use for it. Arthur studied me for a long moment, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He was a good lawyer, but he was also a student of human nature. He knew this was about more than just the law. I understand, he said finally. Consider it done. The letter should arrive at your city apartment within a week. It will look very official and very intimidating. With the legal machinery in motion, all that was left was the personal element. I needed to see Leo. I needed one final conversation before the walls came down. I knew it was a risk. If I tipped my hand, he might warn them. But I had to look my son in the eye. I had to give him one last chance to tell me the truth, unprompted. I flew to the city a few days before Thanksgiving and asked him to meet me for dinner. We went to a quiet Italian restaurant we used to frequent with his mother. The familiarity of the place felt like a ghost, a reminder of a time when our family was whole, when it was just the three of us against the world. Leo was nervous. He fiddled with his silverware, his eyes darting around the room, avoiding mine. We made small talk for a while, the same empty conversation we'd had on the phone. Finally, over pasta, I decided to breach the wall between us. Leo, I said, my voice gentle, I haven't stopped thinking about that donation. I need you to be honest with me. It's very important. He immediately became defensive. Dad, I told you. It was a good thing. Aunt Clara said they're already putting the money to use, setting up educational programs. Did she show you proof of that? I asked. A budget? A proposal? Anything on paper? It's a new charity, Dad, he said, frustration creeping into his voice. It was Robert and Clara's script again. They're still getting set up. You have to have a little faith. Not everything is about spreadsheets and quarterly reports. This isn't about faith, Leo. This is about responsibility, I said, leaning forward. When you give away $1 million of someone else's money, it is absolutely about spreadsheets. It is about due diligence. It is about protecting that money and making sure it goes where it's supposed to go.
Did you do any of that?
He looked down at his plate. Uncle Robert handled all of that, he mumbled. He said it was all taken care of. He said you'd be happy. The way he said it, with such misplaced trust, broke my heart. He was a grown man, but in that moment, he looked like a little boy who had been led astray. My resolve hardened. This was not just for me. It was for him. He needed to be freed from their influence, no matter how painful the process. He told me he vetted them completely. Leo continued, looking up at me, his eyes pleading for me to believe him, to believe in them. He said they were saints, doing work that no one else would. Saints, I repeated softly. And you believed him. Why wouldn't I? He shot back, his voice rising. They're family, Dad. They love me. They've always been there for me, especially after Mom, especially when you were so busy. The words were a direct hit, and they found their mark. He was right. I had been busy. I had buried myself in my work, using it as an anesthetic against the pain of losing Martha. I had left a vacuum in his life, and my brother and his wife had been all too happy to fill it. I had created the very vulnerability they had so expertly exploited. That was a truth I would have to live with. But it did not excuse their actions. Or his. Being family doesn't give them a right to lie to you, Leo, I said, my voice firm again. And it doesn't absolve you of your own judgment. You are 28 years old. You made a decision. I needed to know if it was truly your own. It was, he said, his jaw set stubbornly. It was my idea to do something good. They just helped me find the best way to do it. I leaned back, a deep sadness settling over me. He was still defending them. He was still their soldier. He had failed the test. He had chosen them over the truth. All right, Leo, I said, signaling for the check. I understand. He seemed to relax, thinking he had weathered the storm, that I had accepted his explanation. He had no idea the hurricane was still to come. We finished the meal in a tense silence. As we parted ways on the sidewalk, I put a hand on his shoulder. I will see you on Thursday, I said. At the apartment. 2 o'clock. Don't be late. I'll be there, Dad, he said with a small, relieved smile. I watched him walk away, his shoulders a little straighter, believing he had won. I felt a profound sense of loss. I was about to destroy his image of the two people he trusted most in the world. I was about to show him that his beloved aunt and uncle were criminals who had viewed him as nothing more than a key to a safe. The dinner on Thursday would not be a celebration. It would be an amputation. I was going to cut the poison out of my family, and I prayed that my son would survive the surgery. The day before Thanksgiving, the letter arrived. It came in a plain brown envelope, but the return address in the corner read, Internal Revenue Service, Department of the Treasury. It was perfect. I left it sealed. It was a prop, and its power lay in its potential, in the fear of what it contained. Thanksgiving morning dawned crisp and clear. I spent the day preparing the meal myself. The familiar rituals of cooking were a comfort, a way to ground myself before the storm. I brined the turkey, peeled the potatoes, and prepared the stuffing, my movements precise and automatic. With each chop of a vegetable, with each stir of a sauce, I felt my resolve harden. The apartment filled with the warm, comforting smells of the holiday, a stark contrast to the cold, hard confrontation that was to come. My other family members began to arrive first. My sister, Mary, and her husband. My cousin, Sarah. They were the supporting cast, the audience for the drama that was about to unfold. They were good people, and I felt a pang of regret for turning our family gathering into a courtroom, but it was unavoidable. The rot had to be exposed to the light. Then, at precisely 2 o'clock, Leo arrived. He seemed subdued, but he gave me a hug and wished me a happy Thanksgiving. He was followed a few minutes later by the guests of honor. Robert and Clara swept in, all smiles and loud greetings. Clara was wearing a new cashmere coat I had never seen before, and a large, glittering diamond bracelet dangled from her wrist. Robert was practically glowing with self-satisfaction, clapping men on the back and kissing the women on the cheek. They were playing the part of the happy, successful couple to the hilt. "Mark," Robert boomed, pulling me into an awkward, one-armed hug. "The place smells incredible. You've outdone yourself, as always." "It's just a turkey, Robert," I said, my voice even. "Nonsense," Clara chimed in, handing me a bottle of overpriced champagne. "Everything you do is first class. We were just telling Leo on the way over how lucky he is to have a father like you. So generous." She winked at me, a sly, conspiratorial gesture that made my stomach turn. She thought we were partners in this, that I had accepted the donation, and was happy about it. The arrogance was staggering. We all settled in the living room, making small talk. Robert dominated the conversation, as usual. He talked loudly about a new business deal he was closing, about the state of the economy, about his golf game. Then he seamlessly transitioned to his favorite topic, his own virtue. "You know," he said, swirling a glass of wine, "it's been a truly blessed year for Clara and me. Our business is thriving, but more importantly, we've been able to really focus on our philanthropic work. It's so fulfilling to give back." Clara nodded sagely. "It really is. So many people in this world are focused on just taking. We believe it's our duty to contribute, to lift others up. It's about legacy." There was that word again. Legacy. They were so proud of their little scheme. I caught Leo's eye across the room. He was watching them with an expression of pure admiration. He was completely captivated by their performance. I let them talk for another 20 minutes, letting them dig their own graves a little deeper with every self-congratulatory word. I wanted them to feel comfortable. I wanted them to be at the peak of their hubris when I brought the curtain down. Finally, I stood up and clapped my hands together. "Dinner is ready," I announced. "Let's move to the dining room." We gathered around the large oak table. The turkey sat in the center, golden brown and perfect. The table was laden with food, a picture of holiday abundance. I took my place at the head of the table. Robert and Clara sat to my right, Leo to my left. The trap was set. I carved the turkey, and we passed the dishes around, filling our plates. The first few minutes of the meal were quiet, the sounds of clinking silverware filling the room. I let the silence stretch, building the tension. Then I cleared my throat. "I'd like to make a toast," I said. Everyone stopped eating and looked at me. I raised my glass of water. "This year," I began, my voice calm and steady, "I find I have something very specific to be thankful for. I've been reminded recently of the importance of generosity, the importance of giving back, the importance of legacy." I saw Robert and Clara exchange a small, triumphant smile. They thought this was for them. "As some of you know," I continued, my eyes sweeping the table before landing on Leo, then on Robert and Clara, "a very significant charitable donation was recently made in my name. A truly astounding sum of $1 million. A few gasps went around the table. My sister Mary looked at me, her eyes wide with surprise. "It was an act of incredible vision and generosity," I went on, my voice dripping with false sincerity. "And it was all thanks to the guidance and inspiration of 3 people at this table. My son, Leo, and my brother and sister-in-law, Robert and Clara." Leo flushed with pleasure, a proud smile spreading across his face. Robert puffed out his chest. Clara gave a modest little dip of her head, as if accepting an award. "They brought a wonderful organization to my attention," I said. "The Children's Future Fund. And I was so moved by this gesture that I wanted to do something to honor them, to thank them properly for their incredible foresight and their deep, deep commitment to philanthropy. I paused, letting the moment hang in the air. I had them. They were completely hooked. So, I'd like to present a small token of my gratitude, I said. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out the sealed brown envelope from the IRS. I held it up for everyone to see. "What is that?" Clara asked, her smile faltering slightly. "This," I said, looking at the envelope. "This is my thank you note. You see, I was so impressed with the Children's Future Fund that I decided to get more involved. But when I looked for them, I found they were very new, very discreet. An organization handling millions of dollars should have a public presence, a record of their good deeds. So, I decided to help them with that." I placed the envelope on the table, right between Robert and Clara's plates. I contacted the authorities to make sure this donation was handled properly, that all the tax laws were being followed. A donation of this size, you understand, attracts attention. And the Internal Revenue Service was very interested. Very interested indeed. The color drained from Robert's face. Clara's hand, the one with the glittering new bracelet, froze on its way to her wine glass. "This is an official notice from the IRS," I said, my voice dropping, losing its cheerful edge, and taking on the hardness of steel. "It informs me that due to the size of the donation and the unverified status of the recipient organization, they have opened a full-scale audit. An audit of the Children's Future Fund. And an audit of me, the donor." I looked directly at Robert. "But I'm sure that won't be a problem. As the man who vetted this charity, you must have all the necessary paperwork. The 501c3 registration documents, the list of board members and their meeting minutes, the detailed financial statements showing how every single dollar is being spent to help the children. The IRS investigators will be very eager to see it. So I'm thanking you, Robert. And you, Clara. Thank you for making all of this possible." The silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. The festive holiday atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. Leo was staring at the envelope, then at me, his face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. Clara was the first to speak. Her voice was a shrill, panicked whisper. "What are you doing, Mark? This is a family dinner. This is completely inappropriate." "Is it, Clara?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "I thought we were celebrating your philanthropy. $1 million donation is not inappropriate. It's a federal matter. Wire fraud is not inappropriate. It's a felony." Robert slammed his hand on the table, making the plates jump. "You have no proof," he snarled, his face a mottled red. "You're just trying to humiliate us because you're a miserable old man who's jealous of our happiness." "Proof," I said, and for the first time, I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "Is that what you want, Robert? You want proof?" I reached down beside my chair and lifted a thick leather briefcase onto the table. I clicked it open. Inside were neat stacks of paper, each section marked with a tab. It was Frank's entire investigation file. "Let's see," I said, pulling out the first document. I held it up. It was the photocopy of the driver's license. "Let's start with this. The driver's license for a Mr. Alastair Finch, the esteemed president of the charity. But the face looks awfully familiar. Doesn't it, Robert?" Robert stared at the paper, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He had no words. "And then there's the matter of the website," I continued, pulling out another document. "The one for the charity. Paid for by a transfer from an LLC called Clara Consulting. Is that your business, Clara? The one that's doing so well." Clara looked like she was going to be sick. She stared at me, her eyes wide with terror. "But my favorite piece of evidence," I said, pulling out a sheaf of bank statements, "is this. The bank records for the Children's Future Fund. It shows my $1 million coming in. And then it shows the money going out. $200,000 to your consulting firm, Clara. A consulting fee, I believe. $85,000 to a Mercedes dealership. I do admire your new car, Robert. It's very tasteful. And then there's the big one. $500,000 wired to an account in the Cayman Islands. Tell me, what kind of educational programs for underprivileged children are you running in the Caymans? Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling their lies one by one. The rest of the family was staring at them, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. It was Leo who finally broke the spell. His voice was a choked, broken sound. "Uncle Robert? Aunt Clara," he said, looking from them to me, his eyes filled with a terrible, wounded confusion. "What is he talking about? You told me it was for the kids." Clara burst into tears, a loud, theatrical sob. "He's twisting everything," she wailed. "Your father is a cruel, vindictive man. He's always been jealous of our bond with you." But Robert just sat there, defeated. He looked at the papers on the table, at the IRS envelope, at my face. And in his eyes, I saw not remorse, but pure, unadulterated hatred. He was not sorry for what he had done. He was only sorry he had been caught. "You won't get away with this," he muttered, his voice low and venomous. "Oh, Robert," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I think you have it backwards. The getting away with it part is over. This is the part where you pay. My lawyer has already delivered this entire file to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They are very much looking forward to speaking with both of you." I let that sink in. The finality of it. The utter ruin I had just brought down upon them. "Now," I said, picking up my knife and fork, "if you'll excuse me, I'm going to enjoy my Thanksgiving dinner. I suggest you do the same. It will likely be the last decent meal you have for a very long time." The aftermath was chaos. Clara's sobs turned into hysterical shrieks. Robert began shouting, calling me every name he could think of. My sister Mary was trying to calm everyone down, while her husband just sat there, his jaw on the floor. Leo was the still point in the swirling storm. He sat frozen, his face pale, staring at his plate.
He didn't look at me.
He didn't look at his aunt and uncle. He just stared into space, as if the reality of what he had heard was too massive to comprehend. He had not just been fooled. He had been used as a weapon against his own father. The people he had admired and defended were criminals, and he had been their willing accomplice. The weight of that knowledge seemed to crush him. Robert and Clara finally stumbled to their feet, their faces contorted with rage and fear. "We're leaving," Robert spat, grabbing Clara's arm. "I wouldn't advise that," I said calmly, taking a bite of turkey. "I took the liberty of informing the authorities that you might be a flight risk. There are 2 detectives from the city's Economic Crimes Unit waiting in a car downstairs. My investigator, Frank, is with them, ready to hand over his report and give a statement. Running will only make it worse." That was the final blow. The fight went out of them completely. They slumped back into their chairs, 2 deflated balloons of arrogance and greed. The dinner party was over. The rest of my family, seeing that there was nothing more to be said, began to make their excuses. They left in a quiet, somber procession, murmuring apologies and casting pitying glances at Leo. Soon, it was just the 4 of us left at the table, a tableau of betrayal and ruin. The beautiful meal sat uneaten. I looked at my son. Tears were now streaming silently down his face. He wasn't making a sound, just letting them fall. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't, Leo," I said, and my voice was softer now. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, aching sadness for my son. "They took advantage of your good heart. That's what people like them do." Clara let out a bitter, mocking laugh. "His good heart? We gave him what you never did, Mark. We gave him attention.
We listened to him.
You were always too busy with your precious money. And you wanted a piece of that money so badly you were willing to destroy my son's relationship with me to get it." I retorted, my voice cold again. "You didn't love him. You used him. There's a difference."
The doorbell rang.
The sound was sharp, definitive. I knew who it was. I stood up and walked to the door. Standing in the hallway were 2 grim-faced detectives in suits. "Mark Hannon?" one of them asked. Yes, I said. They're in the dining room. I stepped aside and let them in. The arrest was quiet and professional. They read Robert and Clara their rights. They were handcuffed, their faces ashen. As they were led away, Robert turned and looked at me one last time. His eyes were full of a poison that I knew would never fade. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "No, Robert," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You will." After they were gone, a profound silence fell over the apartment. It was just me and Leo, sitting at the ruined feast. He finally looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and full of shame. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," I said, walking over and putting a hand on his shoulder, "we begin to clean up this mess. It will be hard. Your name will be involved. You will have to give statements. You will have to face the consequences of your choices. But you will not do it alone. I will be with you." The legal process was long and arduous. Arthur was true to his word. He positioned Leo as a victim, and with my testimony and the mountain of evidence, the prosecutors agreed not to press charges against him, provided he cooperated fully.
He did.
He told them everything, his voice shaking as he recounted the lies his aunt and uncle had fed him, the way they had manipulated his desire to do good. Robert and Clara, faced with Frank's airtight investigation, had no choice but to plead guilty. They were convicted of multiple counts of fraud and money laundering. Robert received a sentence of 7 years in federal prison. Clara, who was deemed slightly less culpable, received 4. Their assets were seized. The new Mercedes was impounded. Their house was sold to pay for some of the restitution. They lost everything. Their money, their reputation, their freedom. Recovering the money was a slower process. The funds in the U.S. were recovered quickly. The $500,000 in the Cayman Islands took longer, a frustrating journey through international banking laws, but Arthur was persistent. Eventually, I got most of it back. But by then, the money had ceased to be the point. It was a symbol, nothing more. The real recovery was with Leo. Our relationship was shattered, but in the ruins, we found an opportunity to build something new. For the first time, we talked, really talked. He told me about his loneliness after his mother died, about his feeling of being adrift, of living in my shadow. I told him about my own grief, about how I had hidden in my work because I didn't know how to be a father without her. We were 2 grieving men who had lost their way and lost each other. It was not a quick or easy healing. There was anger. There was resentment. But underneath it all, there was love. He started working with me at my company, not as an heir, but as an entry-level employee. He wanted to learn the business from the ground up to earn his own way. He wanted to understand the value of the money he had so carelessly given away. I saw a new maturity in him, a quiet strength forged in the fire of his betrayal and shame. A year later, Thanksgiving rolled around again. It was just the 2 of us at the big dining table. The empty chairs where Robert and Clara used to sit were a silent testament to the events of the past year. We ate in a comfortable silence for a while. Then Leo looked up at me. "I was thinking about them today," he said quietly. "I imagine so," I replied. "I used to admire them so much," he said, a sad smile on his face. "I thought they were so full of life, so important. I wanted to be like them." "And now?" I asked. He shook his head. "Now I just feel sorry for them. All that energy they spent on pretending, on scheming. What a waste." He looked at me, his eyes clear and direct. "Thank you, Dad." "For what?" "For not giving up on me," he said. "For showing me the truth, even when it was the hardest thing in the world. You saved me from them. And from myself." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "That's what a father does," I said. We finished our meal, and as we cleared the table, I looked around the quiet apartment. The ghosts of the past were finally beginning to fade. The poison had been cut out. The wound was healing. My brother and his wife had tried to steal my money and my son. They had failed. They were in prison, their names a synonym for disgrace within our family. And I was here, with my son, rebuilding our lives on a foundation of honesty. There were 2 empty chairs at my table, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly, deeply thankful. They had taught me a valuable lesson. Forgiveness is a virtue, but sometimes justice is a necessity. They had finally learned what it feels like to have nothing. And my son had finally learned the value of everything he had. That was a legacy I could be proud of.